Let me preface this by saying when this happened, I realized I'm an idiot. The biggest, most naive idiot in the world. I thought that because I had lived in so many countries and seen so many cultures that I was smarter than I was and more grown up than my peers. God, I was wrong. So when the story takes place, I'm 14, and I'm attending a boarding school in Connecticut. I'm a female. My family lives in Switzerland, so I only see them on school holidays. I'm going through my emo phase and pretty much pissed off about everyone being mainstream and how preppy my school is. I make friends with the most non-mainstream kids I could find there. At 22, I still kind of cringe at my past self. One of my friends was dating this townie who wanted to be a tattoo artist, and boy did I want a tattoo. I couldn't wait to turn 18. He agreed to tattoo me as he was just learning and didn't have his license, so what harm could happen? Side note, I now have a terrible tattoo, but I digress. We talk and agree that I'll take the bus to Waterbury and meet him on the green, where all the buses meet and transfer, because I had no idea about the layout of the area as I stayed in the campus bubble. If you don't know, Waterbury, Connecticut has its nice parts, but where I was, it was totally gross. Shootings happen regularly, crackheads abound. It's not a good part of town, but back then I didn't really care. I thought I'd be fine. So, it was Saturday. I just finished my classes, and I'm all excited about getting this tattoo and being edgy. I jumped on the bus and texted my friend's boyfriend and said I'm on the way. Fast forward a little bit and I'm at the green, waiting for him to get out of his classes. He texted me to say he will be an hour late. Great. What the hell am I supposed to do in this shitty part of town alone? 2 hours passed and he says he'll be done in an hour. I really wanted this tattoo, so I waited. I've been sitting there for probably 2.5 hours when I noticed this big black SUV pull up and park in the bus drop-off zone. This big black guy then came out, windows tinted, and I didn't know if he was alone. He sat right next to me. There were loads of empty benches, but he chose the one I was on, a red flag. I'm dressed in a band t-shirt, black skinny jeans with Converse, weird colors in my hair, the usual emo regalia. Nothing was revealing, but I stuck out. I thought he just wanted to talk to me because I was different. Again, I'm a total idiot. He then starts asking me what I'm doing there, where I'm from, and how old I am. Because I thought I could take the world on, I boldly told him I was 14, but more mature than people my age, blah blah blah. Then things got weirder. His eyes lit up, and when I say my age, he asks if I'm a virgin and if I've ever given anyone a blowjob. This was where I panicked. I stuttered and my face got red. He laughed and put his arms around my thigh and squeezed. He said I could jump into his car and he'd treat me right and bring me right back in a few hours. I don't know what to do or say. I'm looking around for an adult, but it was a lull and no buses were there. The man tried to pull me closer to him and I was terrified.
Baby girl, it will only be a few hours. Let me show you how a real man does it. Ever had a black dick before? Once you go black, you never go back.
I lose it at this point. I'm nauseous and about to cry. He sees this and smiles even more, clearly enjoying how uncomfortable I am. He then gets up and starts pulling my arm to get me into his car. I try to resist, but it's a 5'8", 140-pound girl against a 6'2", 250-pound black man. He started to get really aggressive when I was resisting, and he really pulled me along. I was about halfway to his car when I heard someone yell, "Hey, get away from her!" The black man got back in his car and drove away as if he was being chased by the cops. He probably thought it was the police, to be honest. I looked at who saved me, and it was a bus driver who was waiting for a shift to start and watching us from nearby Dunkin's. I just fell to the ground and sobbed. I've never been approached by anyone like this. Never been so close to God knows what awful thing this man could have done to me. I was so helpless. The bus driver calls the police and reports the incident, giving a partial of the plate and description. I tried my best to give a description of the guy, but I was in such shock I don't think I was very useful. I didn't hear anything from them later. I assume they didn't find the guy. In the end, I take another bus back to school and don't tell anyone I was nearly abducted and raped, or God knows, even worse. I couldn't stand to have them think I was weak or couldn't take care of myself, and I was so embarrassed by what I had gotten myself into. So I didn't tell anyone until a year ago. I'm back in that part of the world and told one of my high school friends when we drove past that exact spot that happened. She was shocked. I realized just how in debt I am to that bus driver who literally saved me from being, at the least, abducted. Who knows what that man had in store for me when he got me into his SUV. I ended up meeting with my friend's boyfriend the weekend after, and he made up some bullshit excuse for not meeting me at the agreed upon time, giving me a fake apology. I was so pissed at him after that terrible tattoo he gave me. I don't think I ever talked to him again.
Number 2.
About a year ago, I started dating someone who worked as a state park ranger, who I'll call Jay. Jay lived on the state park property in a 2-bedroom house tucked in the woods. We set the alarm and settled into bed around midnight with Jay's 2 dogs between us, and a 3rd dog crated beside the bed. For some reason, I just couldn't fall asleep, so I laid listening to the dogs snoring and the deafening silence surrounding us while Jay slept. And then it started. A repetitive bouncing sound of some sort was coming from the outside window less than a few feet away from where I was laying in bed, as if someone was dribbling a basketball on cement. The pace would speed up and slow down. The sound would become louder and softer. This continued for well over 2 hours. I wholeheartedly wanted to believe what I was hearing were simply sounds of nature, so I ignored it. Next came the creaks in the walls. I know that houses make sounds, but this was unlike anything I had ever heard before. These sounds started in the hallway as very, very faint creaks. The creaks became louder as they reached Jay's room, and would happen on one wall at a time, going counterclockwise around the room until eventually reached the wall beside me. The creak in the wall beside me was so loud, I jumped and the dogs jolted from their sleep. All the while, I'm still hearing a bouncing ball outside the window, and I'm getting very nervous by the minute. And then at 3 a.m., I heard it. The most ungodly, terrifying growl shrieking from the center of the house. It was so loud that Jay flies off the bed, grabs a shotgun hanging on the wall adjacent to the bed and shouts, "Is somebody in the house?" He took off down the hallway towards the sound. The dogs are going berserk and I'm in tears, absolutely beside myself, pleading with Jay that it was not a person. Jay came back into the bedroom after not finding an intruder or anything and said it must have been one of the dogs. I told him it was certainly not the dogs, as I was awake the entire night and the dogs were asleep in the room with us. Maybe an animal got caught underneath the house. Yeah, maybe, I said. Somehow, after I calmed down a bit, I drift off to sleep. The next thing I know, Jay's on top of me with his hands around my throat, with the meanest look on his face, jerking my head back and forth, suffocating me and hurting me. I can't make out any sound and struggling to push Jay away. And that's when I woke up. It was all a vivid dream. Jay is sleeping beside me. In the morning, we walk into the den to find the heater turned on full blast. It was the middle of the summer. Jay only uses it during winter months as it's original furnace and quite tricky to operate. I'm convinced something in that house did not want me there. That growl will forever haunt me.
Number 3.
This happened a few months ago to me and my girlfriend, referring to her as Jay in this post. When we went on our first holiday together, we had decided to go to Paris, but could only afford 3 days. So we had to cram an awful lot of traveling into a very short space of time. We live in the north of England and we're going to France. Anyway, we arrived at Gare du Nord at 4:30 p.m. local time. Bear in mind, we had been traveling since 3 in the morning and had barely been able to sleep on the journey, so we were completely shattered and just wanted to get to the hotel so we could rest. As we headed for the exit, we noticed several crowds of men gathered around the doors, talking to people going past. However, there was one guy standing away from the crowd, looking around at people going past. He spotted us and came over. He was about the same height as me, around 6 foot, wore a short black overcoat and black trilby hat and shirt and tie. He was mixed race, slim, with a stubble and short dreads peeking out from under his hat. I'll be honest and say he was fairly handsome. There was nothing especially threatening about him that came to mind. Anyway, he came over and asked if we wanted a taxi. We went along with it and told him we did. He told us to come with him and all smiley and friendly. He led us away from the crowds, through a side door and down a stairwell. That struck me as odd, but it soon became apparent it was a car park. There was some work being done outside the station, so it made sense. The guy then started to strike me as a bit odd. He was almost disarmingly cheerful and friendly, and he kept trying to take Jay's bag for her, even though she repeatedly insisted she was alright. After a minute or so of walking around the car park, we got to his vehicle. This was when I started to get the feeling something was up. It was a nice car, but there was no taxi sign. In fact, there was nothing at all about the car or the guy that screamed taxi to me. He took our bags and put them in the boot. Then what he said next really weirded me out. I don't know why we didn't just leave then. You get in the back, and you get in the front. He wanted me in the front. That just came across as completely weird, but being idiot tourists who hadn't slept since about 5 p.m. the previous night, we carried on as normal and got in the car. Once inside, he told us that it would cost us 45 euros to get back to our hotel. We were staggered by the cost, but knew that Paris was expensive, and I think we were frankly kidding ourselves by pretending this was just standard procedure on holiday. Anyway, he sped out of the car park and with the radio on full blast. Every time he spoke, he sounded nervous and jittery, high-pitched and peppering his sentences with high-pitched laughter, either like he was in the last place in the world and he wanted to be, or very excited about something. We were both getting a weird feeling at this stage, but he was going way too fast. It was then that a very happy accident happened. Somebody's car had broken down right in the center of the ticket gate, and we were trapped behind them. Our driver leaned out of the window and started shouting and swearing at him in French. His tone of voice was just completely off for normal road rage. He sounded borderline terrified. As car park attendants rushed around the other car to sort out their problem, I took the chance to ask the driver if he had any kind of taxi driver's ID. His face momentarily fell, but he started smiling again pretty soon. He said he didn't understand, but I didn't believe that for a second, because his English had been impeccable up until then. I asked what taxi company he worked for, and he replied with Uber. I kept pressing him for ID, but he kept saying he didn't understand, or that he didn't need one, or some shit like that. It didn't matter. I looked back at Jay, and we both just nodded, and simultaneously got out of the car. He shouted after us, but we were gone. I went out to the boot to get out our luggage, and he sped forward. Jay was still halfway out of the car door, and I thought for one horrible moment he was trying to drive off with our things, or, at worst, with Jay still in the car. But the other car stalled again, and he got about half an inch before the attendants rushed around him and started to shout at him. Some of the attendants came up to us and were very supportive and kind. They told us where to find the real taxi rank and to avoid anyone like that in the future. They told us that they have had a lot of problems with people like this before and that you could never be too careful. They told us that the best case scenario is you get ripped off for about 40 to 45 euros when you can get a real taxi for 10 euros or less. They didn't tell us what the worst case scenario was, and I'm quite glad about that. Anyway, we found a real taxi driver and he took us to our hotel safely. We got in and went straight to sleep, although we were both a little shaken by what had happened. In retrospect, I think he was probably just aiming to rip us off, but there is still a little part of me that wonders if his demeanor was indicating something more sinister. Call it holiday maker's naivety or whatever. Either way, we both felt so stupid for some time afterward, and we were both so grateful that car encountered problems and the car park attendees were doing their jobs so well.